First of all, I want to thank Zeb, my old friend, to invite me, and also for Cynthia to allow me to come here with Zeb. I want to talk about this book, which is a kind of a project book. Many people helped me from around the world: Hong Kong, Taiwan, Europe, the US, and I've been doing it for the last 3 weeks. But more so, I want to talk about what's behind the book, which is relevant for all of us. I think we're all practitioners of Chinese medicine, or training to become practitioners of Chinese medicine. So we call this book Chinese Medicine Liberation. It's kind of play on words with the Chinese, communist liberation and that kind of thing. But you know, when I came here today, I was supposed to come earlier to meet Zeb, and I couldn't make it on time because I had a new patient from California. By the way, I see her on the computer, and she said, look, I was scheduling to see her today at 12, and she said that last week I went to 3 IVF clinics. I'm specializing in fertility, so that's normally the patients I see. And she said, if you want, we can meet next week or next month. I spoke to 3 IVF clinics, and they told me I have to start the IVF right away. So if you want, we can do our first appointment after the IVF. So that's why I said, no, we have to do it today. And the reason that I'm mentioning this is because the whole idea behind this project we call Chinese Medicine Liberation is actually to try to find where do we want to place ourselves in the 21st century as Chinese medicine practitioner. Like, how do we have a good place in society to do the right thing to help? Now recently, in the last 10 years or so, there's quite a bit of scholarly effort, at least in academia, to reveal Chinese medicine from all kinds of angles, what we call the history of Chinese medicine. And just yesterday I finished reading yet again another book that recently was published. It doesn't matter who wrote it, but it's like a group of scholars from different places that compiled this, and it's pretty good historically. But I'm trying to find the right words, and the only definition that I can come up with is, how can something be so right and yet it's all so wrong? Meaning, all the details, everything is correct. There's not one fallacy, but yet it's all wrong. So the only thing that I can come up with today, I just thought about it this morning. I said, let's take the example of martial arts. Maybe many people do martial arts, Tai Chi, all kind of stuff. I thought it all depends like where you sit or where your position is. If you are sitting in a table with a group of people and we're talking about martial arts, it's actually very good to be very knowledgeable about martial arts. Like all kinds of martial art, all kinds of figures, martial artists, and this kind of, you have a talk, you show your knowledge. But if you're in a little alley and some people come to attack you, actually that kind of knowledge is not so good. All of this book trying to show practitioners of Chinese medicine, not academia people, trying to show the Chinese medicine practitioners how the Chinese medicine evolved or developed, depending on your angle, in the 20th century between the fight with Western medicine or biomedicine, and then between the struggles with ideology in communist China. So this book brings articles that me and my team translated from the basements of Harvard for the last 3 years. All kind of microfilms, articles, book excerpts. So I myself wrote very little in it. We just all translated documents. That's why it's called Chinese Medicine Liberation Inner Documents. It's all original documents showing who fought with who. How did Western scientists wanted to kick out Chinese medicine out of China? Why did Chinese medicine practitioners compromise the medicine to adopt to the Republic, later with the communists? There were all kind of adaptations. And when I read the historical narratives from academia, which again is all 100% accurate, actually they don't have the same heart as us. Like, they don't really want to find out at the end what is the useful place for Chinese medicine in society. They just made an overall observation. Look, that's how they beat it up. That's how they threw that part of Chinese medicine out. That's why they brought biomedicine in. And everything is kind of a dry. Like, I read it at the end of it last night. I finished it at yet another book. And I'm like, wow, there's so much information, but where do I go from here? Like, for me as a Chinese medicine practitioner, actually it doesn't have so much value. I just don't know what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad. For us in Chinese medicine, I think, that's my personal opinion, now in the 21st century. And again, like that book that I read yesterday was actually a group of historians ganging up on Chinese medicine. Meaning, look, for example, you just mentioned acupuncture. Everybody thinks that acupuncture is it. But if you do the history of the 20th century, you see that it was used very little at the end of the Qing and reintroduced, according to science, all kind of narrative. But actually, as we all know, acupuncture was used for a couple of thousand years, or 3,000 years, and it has its ups and downs. So if you read the dry narrative, not that it's wrong, but at the end it's like, where am I going with that? I'm going back to that patient that I saw today. You know, I saw this patient, I just couldn't leave. She said, look, not in that language. She said, look, 3 IVF clinics ganged on me, teamed up on me. They said, I have to do all the drugs tomorrow. And I thought, look, I have already a lot of experience. Try to explain to her different things, not necessarily, look, acupuncture is great and drugs is bad. I have many friends in the IVF world, include leaders in the country in IVF. But I thought, look, this patient is 43-year-old. She didn't do drugs. She actually has some prospects to get pregnant. I need to explain to her as thorough as possible. The key word here that I think is that, how can Chinese medicine help? So, you know, in this book we describe quite well how Chinese medicine evolved, and I realized when I entered into this project, you know, I was doing TCM originally, then I did this classical school. It's all really, really good, and everything is very, very good. And when I went into this project, I said, look, there is this narrative today among classicists. They said, look, TCM is not good, but I don't think that's the case. When I did this project, I realized that many things happen for a reason. And everything is laid out in this book in great detail. Meaning, during the Republic, 1920s, 30s, Western medicine had a big struggle, and Chinese medicine was about to be abolished for the first time in history. So Chinese medicine practitioners, including the cover photo, the first graduating class of the first acupuncture school in Shanghai in the 1920s, they all had to modify, which was fine. All of a sudden I realized this had to be done. Then in the 1950s, 60s, communist ideology, and there's not enough healthcare, so they need cheap healthcare instead of Western medicine, which they didn't have enough. This was also really good at that time to transform it. And then in the 80s, 90s, we have all the classical notions coming back, like authentic, older is better. This was to a certain degree also orchestrated in China in one way or the other. And I find recently, especially in the last 5-10 years, and this is very relevant to us, while in the 50s and 60s, Chinese medicine was used in China for a certain purpose, it started to come down, to weighing down. But all of a sudden now healthcare in China is super expensive, and it actually prices out most of the population in farmland. And they bring Chinese medicine back for that purpose, as if we're in the 50s. Like TCM now is in full blown in China, but the addition of biomedicine to it is paramount, because all the people in the rural area, they know Western medicine, they just don't have enough money to get there. And on and on and on and on, stuff that is actually not related to us. Here at the end, I'm sitting with this patient today. She needs help. Like, how is Chinese medicine can help her? This is what Chinese medicine liberation is about. In other words, we try to liberate as much as we can. Liberate people from all these kind of different agendas. You need to do that. Chinese medicine is actually this. So when I read the historical narrative by historian, again, which is really good, it's not so good enough for us. I bring these articles from practitioners who debated it in the last 100 years. The best of Chinese medicine practitioners in China. And you just translated all what they had to say. This one argued for the acupuncture, for the classic, for modernization, for biomedicine. All the best people in China are kind of stuck into this book in one way or the other, and we just translated what they had to say. So I thought, for a practitioner, this is that kind of contribution, which I sidetracked to my main practice, to give some benefit with it. So this is about that book, and in general, what we call Chinese medicine liberation. So I'm not maybe as wise as my older brother here, but this is that project. This is that project that we put in.
I'm still trying to get out my first book.
What did you mean by the statement that Chinese medicine is all right, yet comes out all wrong?
No, not Chinese medicine. But I was talking about the historical narrative coming from academia. So for example, in this book that I just read, all the details are correct. The communists put the ideology into TCM and during the Republic, this and that. But at the end, I finished the whole book. And it's like, as a Chinese medicine practitioner, not academician in universities, like, where am I going with that? Should I do this or that? That's what I meant. It's not that the facts are wrong. It's like, for a practitioner, we actually need to find the debates to understand who said why, what, and why, and try to resonate with it. Can this help in the 21st century or not?
Do you feel that Chinese medicine, the way it's practiced now, is there something wrong with it in our country?
I think it's more of like medicine by committee.
Medicine by
Committee. In other words, a group of bureaucrats, academics, maybe some doctors decided, let's put it in a form that can be practiced alongside Western medicine, that's relatively easy to learn, that combines acupuncture and herbal medicine. We'll formulate the acupuncture points in a similar way to the herbal formulas to make it teachable in a particular academic setting. In other words, completely formulated in a particular style. And whether that style is good, bad, and different, time will tell. But the thing is that we have the right to know that what we are calling Chinese medicine is studying has been formulated in a certain way. Curriculums have been prepared in a certain way based on these decisions made by committees involving government in China 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Let me also pitch it to you that way. In the 1920s and 30s, there was not enough Western medicine doctors in China. There were 5 of them in Shanghai. You couldn't get rid of Chinese medicine, even though the government initially wanted, and many people suggested it, to abolish it. And so Chinese medicine had its use to deliver a lot of cheap health care, and also the state was playing with it for their needs. In the 1950s and 60s, when the communists took over, there were different reasons. Ideological and against the West, they needed something of their own, which is the Chinese own treasure, etc., etc. But what I'm asking now is, now we're in the 21st century, we're not in China, not in the 20s, not in the 50s, not in the 60s, and there's a different reality. Look, there's no shortage of Western medicine doctors by any stretch of the imagination. Everything Western medicine is over-practiced. There's no like, we need cheap healthcare compared to China in rural area in the 1920s. So I'm asking ourselves, do we need to practice today the same way we practiced in the 50s or the 20s? Actually today, everybody goes to Western doctors and they come to me, not because there's not enough Western doctors like that patient from today, but rather, do you have anything else? So this is like, in the 21st century, where do we go? We start, the 50s and 20s had their needs, and the way Chinese medicine developed then is perfect for them. But now it's kind of different, so I'm just thinking the 21st century, where do we go? It's that kind of a question. I want to also mention, if you want to find out more about this book, you can go to my website, ChineseClassics.org. That's where you can find more about it.
We have some free articles that they make the book. You can get a taste
And we'll
of
be
it.
sure to get the book in the library too.
Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you.
They tried to make me go to rehab. I said